The year was 1865, and the wind howled like a dying beast over the wide-bellied plains of Texas. Dust swirled in low, angry eddies around the hooves of Rhett Callahan's chestnut mare, her flanks dark with sweat from a long ride. The war had been over 6 months, and yet the land still bore its wounds. Burnt homesteads, shallow graves, crosses carved into bark, and men who didn't look each other in the eye. Rhett hadn't spoken in 3 days. He hadn't needed to. Solitude was easier than words. His rifle rested across his saddle, a habit that had never left him. A habit that kept him alive when whiskey and regrets couldn't. His face was leathered from sun and silence, eyes like river stones, gray and unreadable. He passed the crooked skeleton of a fence post and turned his head at the smell of carrion. The mare snorted, eyes rolling. He tugged her reins gently, clicking his tongue. That was when he saw it. At first, it looked like just another wind-beaten tree, an old cottonwood gnarled by years of storms. Then the shape came into focus. A rope, a body. The girl couldn't have been more than 10. Her legs dangled like broken twigs, toes inches from the dirt. Her arms were bound behind her back with a rawhide strip, and her head hung to the side, chin resting on her chest like a prayer unanswered. Skin the color of worn buckskin. Long, dark hair matted with blood and dust. A Kiowa. A child. A rough slab of wood swung from a nail on the tree trunk. Painted letters dripping red like fresh blood. And no mercy for redskins. Rhett froze. The wind stilled. The world narrowed to one sound, the creak of that cursed rope as it twisted in the breeze. He slid from the saddle slowly, boot heels crunching dry grass. His breath felt thick, slow. He drew his knife and stepped forward, but paused when he reached her. He didn't touch the rope. Instead, he looked up into her face, and her eyes opened, wide, brown, alive. Jesus, he muttered, staggering back a step. She didn't move. Didn't speak, but her lips parted, and a faint rattle of breath escaped. Somehow, someway, she still clung to life. Rhett's hands moved before his mind could catch up. He sliced the rope, catching her as she fell into his arms like a sack of nothing. She was light, too light, bones and bruises and filth. Her cheek rested against his shoulder, cold as stone. He laid her gently in the grass and ripped the cloth from his saddlebag, wrapped her like a wounded animal, limbs trembling as she fought for air. She wasn't crying. No tears left. The mare danced behind him, sensing something dark on the wind. He wasn't far from Leander Crossing, maybe an hour's ride. But turning back meant explaining why he carried a half-dead Kiowa girl through a town full of men with loaded guns and empty hearts. He looked at the sign again. No mercy, he whispered. Ain't that the truth? For the briefest moment, he thought about leaving her. Let nature finish what hatred had begun. But then he remembered a different tree, a smaller one, behind a weather-worn cabin outside Shreveport. A white child buried beneath it, a girl with yellow ribbons in her hair. Fever had taken her in a single night. He still saw her sometimes, in dreams, in firelight, in every broken thing he passed. He lifted the Kiowa girl into the saddle, climbed up behind her, and turned his mare west, away from town, toward the Badlands. Rhett rode with one hand on the reins, the other holding the girl upright as her head lolled against his chest. She was breathing in short, shallow bursts. A fever was coming. He could feel it rising off her skin like smoke off sun-baked stone. He didn't have a name for her, so he called her Kid and rode harder. The sun dipped low, dragging long fingers of red across the sky. Shadows crept from the brush like wolves. He remembered an old hunting shack tucked into a gully near the Comanche traces, abandoned for years, but still standing the last time he'd passed. It was shelter, better than nothing. They reached it after dark. The place looked smaller than he remembered, lean-to walls, a sagging roof, door barely clinging to its hinges. But the chimney still stood. He laid the girl on a rickety cot and lit a fire with dried sagebrush and leftover birch bark. The flame stuttered, then rose. He removed her boots, one torn, the other gone. Her feet were blistered, blackened from sun and rope. Her arms bore bruises shaped like hands. His jaw clenched. He poured whiskey onto a rag and cleaned her wounds. She flinched once. Just once. He found a tin of beans, heated them, and left a spoonful near her lips. She didn't eat. The shack was silent save for the pop of wood and the occasional rustle of wind outside. He sat by the fire, shoulders hunched, staring into the flames. Thinking. Regretting. He didn't even know who she was. A raider's daughter? A runaway? Did it matter? He reached into his coat and pulled out a locket. Opened it. Inside, a faded photo of his wife and daughter. Both long gone. Both never far. Your name was Lucy, he whispered, and I never saved you. He closed the locket and looked back at the girl. But I can save her. The words felt foreign. Hope had long since been burned out of him, along with every sermon and promise of redemption. But this girl, this half-dead scrap of breath and bone, she had pulled something out of him. Something old. Something dangerous. The fire burned low. At dawn, the mare stirred. She smelled riders before Rhett heard them. He stepped outside, rifle in hand. 3 men crested the ridge, dirty hats, long coats, rifles slung careless across their shoulders. The lead rider grinned when he saw Rhett. Well now, he called. Didn't expect to find you out here, Callahan. Didn't expect to be found, Rhett replied, voice flat. We followed the blood. Figured you'd come west. They stopped a dozen paces away. The leader, a gaunt, fox-faced man named Cray Dobbs, leaned forward in the saddle. That girl, he said. The Kiowa. She alive? Rhett didn't answer. Cray spit. You always had a soft spot. We found her sneaking around the stagecoach trail. Could have been scouting for an ambush. Could have been begging. Don't matter. Law's clear. This ain't law, Rhett said. It's murder. Cray's eyes narrowed. You riding for them now? Rhett didn't blink. I ride for no one. One of the others, younger, angry-eyed, leaned forward. We'll take her. She's not yours to take. She's not yours neither. The moment tightened like a noose. Rhett shifted, hand near the rifle sling. Cray saw it, smiled. You gonna shoot 3 men for a red girl? No, Rhett said. Then he shot one. The boom shattered the dawn. The youngest dropped like a sack of meat, blood spraying the sand. The mare reared. Cray shouted, drew. Rhett fired again, missed. Cray's bullet tore through Rhett's coat, grazed his ribs. He threw himself into the shack, dragging the door shut behind him. Bullets punched through the wood, splintering beams. The girl whimpered. He grabbed her, slung her over his shoulder, burst through the back wall, crashing into sagebrush as gunfire barked behind him. The mare whinnied from behind the trees. Rhett reached her, shoved the girl into the saddle, swung up, kicked hard. They galloped, through scrub and rock, bullets in the dirt. The girl clung to him, face pressed to his chest, silent and shaking. Cray shouted, but they didn't follow. They wouldn't risk the trace road. Not without numbers. Rhett didn't stop until they'd crossed the dry riverbed and climbed a red dirt hill where mesquite trees clung like ghosts. There, he slid from the saddle, breath ragged, blood soaking his shirt. He didn't fall. Not yet. The girl stared at him. Her eyes held something different now. Not fear. Something older. Name, he asked through gritted teeth. She hesitated, then whispered, almost too soft to hear. Wasi. He nodded. Wasi. Then the world tilted. He hit the ground hard, coughing red. Above him, the sky spun. Wasi knelt beside him, small hands pressing against his wound. Her voice wavered in Kiowa. A prayer? A curse? He didn't know. He closed his eyes. I got you, he whispered. I got you, kid. And everything went dark. Rhett came to with dust in his mouth and a fever clawing through his gut. For a long minute, he thought he was back at Antietam, bleeding in the dirt beside a ditch full of men with half their faces gone. But then came the smell of juniper smoke and the flicker of firelight through his swollen eyelids, and he knew he hadn't died. Not yet. A soft rustle. Bare feet. He cracked an eye open. The girl, Wasi, sat cross-legged beside him, her dark hair hanging in a curtain over her face. She had wrapped his chest with torn strips of his own shirt, blood dried to a crust at the edges. The fire popped, sending sparks up into the cool, desert air. "You saved me," he rasped. She didn't respond, didn't even look at him. But she reached out and placed a small, flat stone into his palm. He blinked at it. Simple, smooth, carved with a tiny spiral. He held it like it meant something. Maybe it did. Later, when the pain lessened and the shakes passed, he managed to sit up. They were camped in a gully not far from the old Comanche traces. The mare was grazing nearby, one ear cocked. The sun had dropped behind the hills, casting everything in copper and rust. Wasi watched him, silent as a deer in a snare. "You got people?" he asked. She tilted her head, then slowly nodded. "North." She nodded again. "Then that's where we'll go." Still nothing. Just that quiet stare. Rhett stood, slow and stiff, clutching his ribs. He wasn't at full strength, but he wasn't dead, and that was something. The thought of riding north, wounded, low on supplies, with a Kiowa girl in tow didn't exactly warm his heart, but it gave him a reason to move. And for Rhett Callahan, that was as close to hope as he'd felt in years. They broke camp before dawn. By the third day, the fever in his ribs had faded, though his movements were stiff as splintered wood. Wasi had started to follow his gestures. When he said, "Fire," she'd point to the kindling. When he said, "Eat," she'd pull the tin of beans from the saddlebag. She still didn't speak much, but she listened, learned. He found himself talking more, just to fill the silence. "I used to own 20 head," he said one night, chewing jerky by the fire. "South of Abilene. Land was good, mostly. Wife said she wanted a porch facing the sunrise." He paused. "She got it. Then the fever took her. Took our girl, too." Wasi sat nearby, knees pulled to her chest, watching the flames. Rhett stared into the darkness. "Buried them beneath a cottonwood. Same tree I carved her name into. Lucy, 6 years old. Blonde as corn silk. The dead stay quiet, but they don't stay gone." Wasi reached out and poked the fire with a stick, stirring the coals. He didn't expect comfort, and she didn't offer any. But she was there. That was enough. Somewhere behind them, back near Leander Crossing, Cray Dobbs was likely gathering men. The kind that didn't mind shooting a child if it meant claiming a bounty. The kind Rhett used to drink with, and now couldn't stand to look at. He knew they'd come. He just didn't know when. The terrain grew rougher as they moved north. Cactus plains turned to jagged hills and red stone bluffs. Game grew scarcer. Rhett's bullets fewer. Water had to be sniffed out from dry riverbeds and shaded cracks in the rock. Through it all, Wasi never once complained. She walked when the mare, tired, slept light as wind, and rose before dawn to scout their path. There was something in her, quiet strength, sharp eyes, wild but not broken. By the time they reached the edge of what Rhett figured was Kiowa territory, the sky had turned pale with cold and the days felt shorter. They camped beside a narrow river with current too strong to ford safely. Rhett paced the bank, jaw tight. "It ain't crossable here," he muttered. "Not without rope. Not without luck." Wasi pointed upstream, eyes alert. A fallen log stretched across the water like a crooked spine. Slippery. Narrow. Death if they fell. He followed her to the spot. Looked. Shook his head. "I've seen better bridges in hell." She stepped onto it anyway, arms outstretched for balance. "Hey," Rhett barked, grabbing her wrist. "No." She looked at him, not afraid, just determined. He sighed, unstrapped the rope from his saddle, and tied them together at the waist. "You fall, we both do," he said. "But at least I'll go down knowing I tried." They crossed slowly. The log creaked under their weight. Water thundered below, crashing against rocks the size of steers. Halfway across, a gust of wind howled through the canyon. Wasi wobbled. Rhett shouted. She dropped to her knees, clinging to the log. He crouched behind her, pressing one hand to her back. "Easy. You're all right." She nodded, teeth clenched. They moved again. When they reached the far side, Rhett collapsed on the shore, breathing hard. Wasi stood over him, smiling for the first time since he'd met her. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Guess you got more guts than I do." That night, they shared the last of the beans. He carved notches into a stick, one for each day since the hanging tree. 7. Across the fire, Wasi stared at him. "You name?" she asked, voice hoarse from disuse. He blinked. Rhett. She nodded. Rhett. The next morning brought a new challenge. Tracks. Fresh. Hoof prints. 6 riders. Heavy. Headed their way. Rhett studied them with a veteran's eye. One horse limped slightly. Another rider wore square-toed boots, a rancher, not cavalry. They weren't scouts. They were bounty hunters. He turned to Wasi. We got move. Fast. They pushed hard into the hills, riding until the sun stood high and mean. The land narrowed to a rocky gorge hemmed in by cliffs. Rhett didn't like it. No cover, no escape routes. But it was the fastest way north. They passed through the cut and emerged onto a plateau dotted with mesquite and dry brush. That was when the wolves came. 3 of them, lean, hungry, drawn by the scent of the mare. The first one appeared near a boulder, yellow eyes glowing in the dusk. The second slinked behind, cutting off their path. Rhett raised his rifle. Stay behind me, he said. The third wolf lunged from the left, snarling, fangs bared. Rhett fired. Missed. The wolf hit his side, knocking him into the dirt. Teeth sank into his arm. He punched wildly, connected with its snout. It yelped, staggered back. Then the fire. Wasi, screaming, had grabbed a burning branch from their cooking fire and swung hard. The flames caught the wolf's coat. It ran, yelping into the brush. The others followed. Rhett sat in the dirt, clutching his bleeding arm. Wasi dropped the branch and knelt beside him. You okay? She asked, breathless. He nodded, dazed. You saved my hide, kid. She smiled, then looked at the wound. Rhett bit down on a piece of leather as she cleaned it with whiskey and wrapped it tight. The girl had fire in her, more than he ever expected. That night, they sat close by the fire, no longer 2 strangers stitched together by circumstance. Now, they were a team, but the danger hadn't passed. 3 days later, they were found. It happened at dawn. The air was sharp, the sky pale with frost. Rhett had just begun saddling the mare when he saw movement at the ridge. Riders. He grabbed Wasi and ran for the rocks. Gunfire split the morning. He shoved her behind a stone outcrop and drew his rifle. Stay down. Don't move. A bullet sparked off the rock beside him. He fired back. One rider fell. Then came the voice. Rhett Callahan. He froze. Cray Dobbs. You still alive, you old bastard? Cray shouted. Thought that girl would have gotten you killed by now. Rhett didn't answer. You can't run forever. Give her up. We'll make it quick. Wasi clutched Rhett's sleeve. He looked at her. She was breathing hard, but her eyes were steady. He knew what he had to do. He slipped down the rocks, rifle slung over his back, revolver drawn, moved like a shadow through the brush. Cray and the others waited in a small clearing, laughing. Loose. Rhett stepped out and fired. One shot. Clean. The man next to Cray dropped. Cray dove for cover. Damn you. Rhett ducked, rolled, came up behind a tree. Bullets tore through branches. Cray's voice turned mean. That girl's a savage. You protect her, you might as well wear war paint. Rhett shouted back. She's got more honor than any man riding with you. Then silence. He peeked out. Too quiet. Where was Wasi? Then, behind Cray, movement. Small. Steady. Wasi. She held Rhett's revolver in both hands, shaking, aimed, pulled the trigger. Click. Empty chamber. Cray turned. She screamed. Bang. Rhett shot him from the side, bullet ripping through Cray's chest. The outlaw stumbled, dropped, eyes wide with surprise. Wasi ran to Rhett, dropped the revolver. He caught her. It's all right, he said. It's over. The last 2 men fled into the trees. Rhett let them go. He was bleeding again. Not bad, but enough to slow him. Wasi helped him back to the camp. They didn't speak much that night. But when Rhett opened his eyes the next morning, she was still there, still watching the fire, still beside him. And for the first time, Rhett Callahan wondered if he might just see this journey to the end. Snow had come early to the northern hills, not in flurries or fanfare, just a soft dusting, cold enough to bite, but quiet enough to go unnoticed until your fingers stiffened and the wind carved your bones like bark. Rhett Callahan felt it in his ribs, still sore from the bullet and the ride, and in the ache behind his eyes that had never really left since Shiloh. The mare moved slow now, each hoof step a thud against frostbitten ground. Wasi rode behind him, arms wrapped tight around his waist, chin tucked beneath his collar. She hadn't spoken in hours, but he could feel her heart through his coat. Still steady, still strong. The land had changed. Gone were the endless brown plains and snake-bit gullies. Here, the earth rose into hills of red and gray, dotted with pine and stone. Deer tracks ran like stitched thread across fresh snow, and distant birds wheeled overhead in slow spirals. Rhett watched everything now. He trusted nothing. Not since Cray Dobbs had come crawling out of the dust with that damned hate in his eyes. Not since Wasi had nearly been taken again. He'd kept her close ever since. Too close, maybe, but he'd learned something in that moment, when the hammer clicked and the chamber was empty and she didn't run or scream. She'd stood her ground, risked everything. For him, that kind of bravery didn't come from teaching. It was born, buried deep like a flint spark under ash. And Rhett Callahan had no intention of letting it die. Ahead, the trail narrowed, carved between two limestone outcrops that looked like teeth. Beyond that he knew was Kiowa land, or what remained of it, scattered villages, half-hunted buffalo, and bands of warriors watching from shadows. He'd heard the stories. Settlers vanishing in the night. U.S. cavalry patrols never coming back. But the way he saw it, those men deserved what came for them. Most of them. Rhett pulled the mare to a halt and looked back at Wasi. "We're close," he said. She didn't respond, just blinked up at him, her face wrapped in a strip of old wool. He noticed her lips were cracked. She needed warmth. Food. Family. Things he couldn't give her. "Not much farther," he murmured more to himself. They passed through the rocks in silence. The wind there was strange, howling through cracks like voices whispering things better left buried. On the other side, the valley opened up into a bowl of tall grass and spruce trees, dusted white. Smoke curled lazily from two distant lodges, the kind Rhett hadn't seen since before the war. No fences, no wagons, just earth and sky and breath. Wasi stirred behind him. He turned, her eyes locked on the smoke, her lips parted. "Home?" he asked. She nodded. They rode down slow, keeping to the tree-line until they reached the edge of the clearing. Rhett dismounted, scanning the shadows. No movement, but he felt it, eyes on him. Dozens, maybe more, watching from behind bark and branches, silent as ghosts. He raised both hands. "I'm not here to fight," he called, just bringing her back. No answer. No movement. Wasi slid from the horse and stood beside him. Then she stepped forward, walking into the clearing without fear, arms open. She said something in Kiowa, soft, melodic. It carried on the wind like smoke. A moment passed, then another. And then from the trees they came. Two men, painted and lean, bows in hand, followed by three more. Behind them, an elder woman with silver threaded through her braids. Her eyes found Wasi widened. She ran forward, clutching the girl with both arms, sobbing into her hair. Rhett let out the breath he didn't know he'd been holding. One of the warriors pointed his bow at Rhett. Another raised a tomahawk. He raised his hands again. "I ain't here to take her," he said. "She's yours. She's safe." The warriors looked to the elder woman. She nodded, speaking something sharp and short. The weapons lowered. Wasi turned and looked back at him. Her face was wet, but her smile broke through like sun through storm. He tipped his hat. "I reckon this is where we part ways." She walked back to him, reached into her coat, pressed something into his palm. The stone, the one she'd given him before, carved with the spiral. "You keep," she said. His throat worked, but no words came. So he nodded, just nodded. He turned, climbed onto the mare, and rode away without looking back. The snow thickened by nightfall. Rhett found shelter beneath a rocky overhang, built a fire, and sat there staring at the spiral stone in his palm. The silence was deeper now. Not lonely exactly, just empty. He tried sleeping. Failed. And then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Distant. Fast. He rolled to his feet, rifle in hand. A rider burst through the dark. Kiowa. A boy. Breathless. He spoke fast, pointing back the way he'd come. White men, he said. Guns. Many. Rhett's blood turned to ice. He grabbed his rifle, kicked out the fire, and mounted up. They rode hard. When they crested the ridge, overlooking the valley, smoke was already rising, not the soft gray of cook fires. Black smoke. Thick. Angry. Wassie's village was burning. He didn't think. Just charged. Gunshots cracked through the trees. Screams followed. He saw figures moving, blue coats, settlers with axes, men with torches. He fired once, dropping a man near the lodge. Another turned, shouted, "It's Callahan. He's back." Rhett shot again. He reached the clearing as chaos unfolded. Wassie's people scattered, some fighting, some fleeing. The elder woman lay still near the lodge, blood soaking her dress. He saw Wassie trapped behind a burning fence, cornered by two men with rifles. He galloped straight at them, yelling. One turned, fired. Missed. Rhett didn't. The second man raised his gun, but Wassie moved first, throwing a stone straight into his face. He stumbled, she ran. Rhett reached her, grabbed her arm, hauled her up. Where? He shouted. She pointed east. He kicked the mare hard. They tore through the trees, ducking gunfire, smoke trailing behind them like ghosts. They didn't stop until the world went quiet again. They hid in a dry ravine, hearts pounding. Wassie curled beside him, shaking, not from fear, from rage. They burn everything, she said, voice hollow. I know. They come again. I know. He looked at her, really looked. She wasn't a child anymore. Not now. Not after this. They're going to keep coming, he said, until someone makes them stop. She nodded. Then we stop them. He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he tightened the strap on his rifle and stood. You sure about that? She rose beside him. The fire in her eyes said more than any oath. Together, they walked through the ashes of a world that refused to leave them be. And somewhere between the smoke and the silence, Rhett Callahan found something he'd thought long dead. Purpose. Days later, when the wind had calmed and the dead were buried, Rhett stood beside Wassie at the edge of a new village they helped build, a circle of lodges farther north, deeper into the hills. He handed her a carved stick. 16 notches now, one for each day since the rope in the tree. She held it like it was sacred. This won't stop, she said. Not for a long time. He nodded. No, but you got people now. You got a fire inside you. She looked up at him. You too. He smiled. First time in years. He mounted his mare. Looked down at her. Keep that stone, she said. Spiral means strength. He touched his chest. I'll remember. He turned, rode toward the west, where the sun burned low and gold behind the ridgeline. Her voice followed him. Rhett. He turned one last time. She raised her hand in farewell. He tipped his hat. Then he was gone. The trail was long, the land unkind, but something had shifted. Not the world, not the cruelty, but him. He'd looked. He hadn't looked away, and he never would again. The frontier wasn't just a place. It was a reckoning, a fire that burned away lies and left only truth. And the truth was this. One girl, one rope, one man who wouldn't look away. The first snow had melted by the time Rhett Callahan returned to the hills. He rode alone. The mare's gait was slow, her hooves careful over frost-heaved earth. In the saddlebag was all he had left, bullets, dried meat the stone Wassie had given him, and a wanted poster worn soft with folding. Cray Dobbs. Murder. Arson. Indian killing. Dead or alive. The reward was blood money, and Rhett wanted none of it. But he wanted Dobbs. Since that night, since the fire and the smoke, and the bodies lying cold in the dirt, he hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every time he shut his eyes, he saw Wassie standing at the edge of the new village, blood on her boots. Her voice cracked from shouting the names of the dead. They buried 13 that day. She didn't cry. She just handed him a bow and said, "Next time we hunt them." He hadn't said yes. Hadn't needed to. Their eyes had spoken all that was left to say. Now he rode toward the place where Dobbs had last been seen. Dead Man's Gulch, a crooked pass between two cliffs where the wind never stopped and buzzards circled day and night. The perfect place for men like Dobbs to crawl into. At the top of the rise, he spotted smoke. Thin, controlled, campfire. Rhett dismounted, tied the mare to a scrub tree, and checked his rifle. Loaded, he slid his Colt from its holster and moved forward, boots silent in the frost. The gulch opened before him like a wound, twisting, narrow, rimmed in ice. There were 3 of them. Dobbs sat near the fire, legs crossed, sharpening a blade. 2 others, a big man with a bear claw necklace and a wiry one with sunburnt skin, watched the trail, with rifles on their knees. They weren't expecting company. Rhett stepped out slow, gun raised. Dobbs. The name hung in the air like smoke. Cray Dobbs looked up. His eyes were yellowed, snake-like. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, grinning. "Callahan." Rhett didn't smile. "You, and I got something to settle." Dobbs stood, didn't reach for a gun, just flexed his shoulders like a man about to stretch. "You rode all the way out here for that squaw girl?" he asked. "You sweet on her, Rhett?" Rhett cocked the hammer. "I rode out here for the ones you burned, the ones you hanged, the ones you'll never touch again." The big man stood now. The wiry one raised his rifle. "You shoot," Dobbs said, "and you don't leave this gulch alive." Rhett shrugged. "Don't plan to." Then he fired. The wiry one went down first, a shot through the throat. The big man roared and charged, swinging a club. Rhett ducked, fired again, missed. They collided, went down in a tumble of fists and snow and curses. The big man landed a blow to Rhett's ribs, another at his jaw. Stars danced in Rhett's vision. He rolled, grabbed the knife at his belt, and drove it up. The man froze, twitched, went still. Rhett pushed him off, bleeding from his mouth. Dobbs clapped slowly from across the fire. "Not bad, soldier boy. Still got that fight in you." "Come test it," Rhett growled. Dobbs grinned. Drew. The gunfight was fast, ugly. First shot, Rhett clipped Dobbs' shoulder. Second, Dobbs missed. Third, Rhett's gun jammed. Dobbs smiled like death. But before he could shoot again, a cry came from the rocks. "Wasi!" She dropped from a ledge like a shadow, arrow already loose mid-fall. It struck Dobbs in the thigh. He screamed, stumbled, turned to run, but Rhett tackled him before he could vanish. They hit the ground hard. Dobbs clawed at Rhett's eyes, bit his arm, kicked like a cornered dog. Rhett punched him once, twice, again. Blood spilled. Finally, Dobbs went limp, panting, half-conscious. Wasi stood over them, another arrow knocked. "You kill him?" she asked, voice cold. Rhett looked down. He could, should, but something in him paused. Not mercy, not pity, something older. He grabbed the rope from his belt, tied Dobbs' hands tight, then hauled him to his feet. Not yet. Together, they dragged him back to the village. The walk was long, slow. Dobbs cursed and spat the whole way. "I'll come back," he hissed. "You hear me, girl? You think you stopped me? I got friends. I got—" Wasi hit him with a bow across the face. Silence followed. When they reached the village, the people gathered. They didn't cheer, didn't smile. They watched. Rhett threw Dobbs to the dirt. "This the one," he said. "This is who burned your homes." The elder, the one they now called Grandmother Willow, stepped forward. She looked down at Dobbs with ancient, tired eyes. She didn't speak. She simply turned and walked away. Then others came, silent, solemn. One brought rope. Another brought firewood. They knew what justice looked like. Dobbs' eyes finally showed fear. You can't. I'm a white man. The law." Rhett leaned close. "Law didn't stop you from killing a child." They tied the rope. Wasi stood at the tree where they'd found her months ago. The same tree, same branch. She didn't flinch. Dobbs kicked, cursed, then swung. The wind took his last words. Rhett didn't look away. That night, the fire in the center of the village burned higher than any he'd seen before. Wasi sat beside him, wrapped in a buffalo cloak, face painted red beneath her eyes. "Is it over?" she asked. He stared into the flames. "No, but it's a start." She didn't nod, didn't speak. She just leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat like that until the stars blinked out. At dawn, Rhett saddled up. The mare was restless. So was he. Wasi walked with him to the edge of the trail. "You always leaving," she said. "I always coming back." She looked at him, quiet. "You believe in ghosts?" "I've seen too many not to." "Then stay. Help us fight." He reached into his coat, pulled out the spiral stone. Soon he said, "But first I got to make sure there ain't more devils crawling behind Dobbs." She stepped close, touched his chest. "You come back. I always do." He mounted up, turned the mare west. She watched until he was a speck on the horizon. Then she turned, back to the fire, back to her people, and back to the world that had almost broken her, but never would again. The frontier was a fire. It burned all eyes. But sometimes in the ashes, something stronger was born.